When Sarah Chen traded love for luxury, leaving her struggling boyfriend David for a wealthy real estate developer, she thought she was making the smart choice. Life had other plans. As karma deals its cards and fortunes shift overnight, Sarah learns that true wealth isn't always measured in dollars. In this tale of love, loss, and redemption, one lottery ticket will change everything, but not in the way anyone expects. Sarah Chen stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the upscale restaurant, trying to convince herself she was doing the right thing. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Marcus, her new suitor, sparkled under the warm lighting. It was worth more than what her boyfriend David could afford in a year. David, sweet, kind, struggling David. The thought of him made her heart clench with guilt, but she pushed the feeling aside. They had been together for 3 years, since their junior year of college. But lately, things had changed. While their classmates landed prestigious jobs and moved into luxury apartments, David remained stuck in his dead-end position at a local nonprofit, barely making enough to cover his share of their modest apartment rent. Sarah smoothed down her designer dress, another gift from Marcus, and walked back to their table, where Marcus waited with a knowing smile. At 35, he was 10 years older than her, but his success as a real estate developer meant he could offer her the life she'd always dreamed of. "Everything all right, beautiful?" Marcus asked, reaching for her hand across the table. "Yes," Sarah replied, though her stomach churned. "Just nervous about tonight." "Don't be. You're making the right choice." Marcus squeezed her hand. "You deserve someone who can give you the world." Later that evening, Sarah sat on the worn couch in the apartment she shared with David, waiting for him to return from his late shift. The space felt suffocating. The secondhand furniture, the cheap prints on the walls, the constant reminder of their financial struggles. David had been working overtime for months, claiming he was saving for their future, but Sarah had grown tired of waiting. When David finally walked in, his tired face lit up at the sight of her. "Hey, beautiful! I picked up some takeout from that Thai place you love." He held up a paper bag, his genuine smile making everything harder. "David, we need to talk." Sarah's voice quivered despite her resolve. David's smile faded as he set the bag down. He must have noticed her packed suitcase by the door, because his shoulders slumped. "What's going on?" "I can't do this anymore," Sarah began, the rehearsed words tumbling out. "We've been stuck in the same place for too long. All our friends are moving forward with their lives, buying homes, traveling the world, and we're still here, counting pennies. Sarah, I told you I'm working on something big. Just give me a little more time." "That's all you ever say." Sarah stood up, pacing the small living room. Time, time, time. "I'm tired of waiting, David. I'm tired of watching life pass us by while you chase some dream that might never happen." "Is there someone else?" David's quiet question stopped her in her tracks. Sarah couldn't meet his eyes. "His name is Marcus. He's successful, established. He can give me the life I want." The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally looked at David, the pain in his eyes made her want to take everything back. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. "I see." David's voice was hollow. "How long?" "We've been seeing each other for 2 months," Sarah admitted. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did." David walked to the window, his back to her. "And now you're choosing him." "I'm choosing myself," Sarah corrected, though the words felt false even to her ears. "I deserve more than struggling paycheck to paycheck, right?" David's laugh was bitter. "Because love isn't enough anymore, is it? It's all about the fancy restaurants and designer clothes now." Sarah flinched at his accuracy. "That's not fair. I've supported your dreams for years, put my own aspirations on hold. I can't do it anymore." "I never asked you to put anything on hold," David said quietly. "You made that choice yourself." Sarah grabbed her suitcase, needing to escape before she crumbled. "Marcus is waiting outside. I'll send someone for the rest of my things tomorrow." David didn't turn around. "I hope he makes you happy, Sarah. I really do." As Sarah walked out of their apartment, their home, for the last time, she forced herself not to look back. This was the right decision. It had to be. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of luxury and excitement. Marcus swept Sarah into his world of high-end parties, exotic vacations, and endless shopping sprees. She moved into his penthouse apartment, traded her practical Honda for a Mercedes, and slowly began to forget the guilt that had plagued her in those first few weeks. But sometimes, late at night, when Marcus was away on business trips, Sarah would find herself thinking about David. About his infectious laugh, the way he always knew when she needed a hug, how he'd spend hours listening to her dreams and fears. Marcus gave her everything she thought she wanted, but something was missing. She threw herself into her new life, accepting a position at Marcus's company and trying to ignore the whispers from colleagues who knew how she'd gotten the job. She hadn't heard anything about David since their breakup, though mutual friends told her he'd quit his job at the nonprofit shortly after she left. "Good riddance," Marcus had said when she mentioned it. That place was holding him back anyway, though I doubt he'll ever amount to much. The comment had bothered her more than it should have. 6 months into her relationship with Marcus, Sarah began to notice changes. The lavish gifts became less frequent, replaced by critical comments about her spending habits. The romantic gestures gave way to demanding expectations. When she questioned a suspicious text message on his phone, Marcus's charming facade cracked, revealing an ugly temper she hadn't known existed. "You're being paranoid," he'd snapped. "After everything I've given you, you dare question my loyalty? Remember where you came from, Sarah. Remember who made you who you are now." The words stung because they contained a grain of truth. Who was she now? The designer clothes and expensive jewelry felt like a costume, and the woman who stared back at her in the mirror seemed like a stranger. One evening, while scanning social media, Sarah came across a photo that made her heart stop. It was David, but not the David she remembered. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, standing in front of a sleek office building. The caption read, "Excited to announce the launch of Green Innovation Labs. Dreams do come true." Sarah's fingers trembled as she clicked through his profile. There were more photos. David cutting ribbons at ceremonies, shaking hands with well-known tech entrepreneurs, being interviewed by Business Magazine. How had she missed all of it? A quick Google search revealed what she'd been too self-absorbed to notice. David had been developing a revolutionary green energy technology for years, working overtime, not because he was stuck, but because he was building something extraordinary. The nonprofit job had been a cover, allowing him to develop his ideas without attracting attention from larger competitors. Green Innovation Labs was now valued at over $500 million, with David as its founder and CEO. The technology he'd developed promised to revolutionize renewable energy storage, making clean power more accessible to communities worldwide. Sarah felt the room spinning as she read article after article. All those late nights, all those extra hours he'd worked. He hadn't been stuck in a dead-end job. He'd been changing the world. "What are you looking at?" Marcus's sharp voice made her jump. She quickly closed the browser, but not before he caught a glimpse of David's photo. "Still pining after your ex?" Marcus sneered. "How pathetic. Though I must admit he's done well for himself. Who would have thought?" Sarah stood up, suddenly angry. "Don't talk about him like that." "Or what?" Marcus stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. "You'll run back to him? Please, you think he'd want you now? After you threw him away for money?" The truth in his words hit her like a physical blow. What had she done? That night, unable to sleep, Sarah found herself walking through the city, eventually ending up in front of her old apartment building. The lights were on in what used to be their unit, and she could see a family moving around inside. A young couple with a small child. They looked happy, content in their modest surroundings. Sarah remembered how happy she'd been there too, before she'd let greed and impatience poison everything. David had tried to tell her about his plans, but she'd been too focused on what she didn't have to listen, too eager to trade true love for luxury. As she stood there, memories washing over her, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when David stepped out, looking more handsome than ever in a casual sweater and jeans. Designer ones, she noted ironically. He was carrying a small package. Their eyes met across the street, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. David's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see the flicker of recognition, of pain in his eyes. She wanted to run to him, to explain, to apologize, to tell him she'd made a terrible mistake. But before she could move, another car pulled up. A stunning woman with kind eyes emerged, greeting David with a warm smile. Sarah watched as David's face transformed, lighting up with the same genuine joy he used to show her. He handed the woman the package, a birthday gift, Sarah would later learn, and they walked away together, their easy intimacy obvious even from a distance. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face as she realized the full magnitude of what she'd lost. Not just David's love, but his trust, his friendship, the future they could have built together. She'd traded it all for a gilded cage, choosing empty luxury over real connection. Back in Marcus's penthouse, Sarah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, just as she had the night she'd left David. The diamond tennis bracelet felt heavy on her wrist, like a shackle rather than an ornament. In the other room, she could hear Marcus talking loudly on the phone, bragging about his latest business deal. She thought about David's success, not because of the money it represented, but because it showed his dedication, his integrity, his commitment to making the world better. While she'd been chasing material wealth, he'd been pursuing something meaningful. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Where are you? The Henderson's charity gala starts in an hour. Wear the blue dress I bought you." She looked at the message, then at her reflection again. The woman in the mirror had changed so much in the past months, become someone she barely recognized. But maybe it wasn't too late to find herself again. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in her temporary apartment, a modest studio she'd rented after finally leaving Marcus. The decision hadn't been easy. Marcus had alternated between rage and manipulation, threatening to destroy her career one minute and promising to change the next. But for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. She'd resigned from her position at Marcus's company, accepting a lower-paying job at a small marketing firm. Her designer clothes hung untouched in the closet, replaced by simple, comfortable attire. The tennis bracelet and other jewelry had been returned, despite Marcus's attempts to make her keep them, as reminders of what she was throwing away. As Sarah scrolled through job listings on her laptop, a news notification caught her eye. Green Innovation Labs had just secured a major government contract to implement their energy storage technology in developing nations. The article included a photo of David speaking at the UN, his passion evident even through the screen. Sarah clicked away quickly, but not before noticing the woman from that night. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, the article named her, standing proudly by David's side. A quick search revealed she was a brilliant environmental scientist who'd been instrumental in refining David's technology. They made a perfect pair, both dedicated to making a positive impact on the world. The knowledge hurt, but it was a clean kind of pain, like setting a broken bone. Sarah had been doing a lot of thinking about why she'd left David, about the person she'd become. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her own insecurities, her need for external validation, her fear of not being enough. One morning, as Sarah walked to her new job, she passed a newspaper stand with David's face on the cover of a business magazine. The headline read, "Green Innovation Lab, Founder Reveals Humble Beginnings." Curiosity got the better of her, and she bought a copy. The article detailed David's journey, including the years of secret development while working at the nonprofit. But what caught Sarah's attention was a small paragraph near the end. When asked about the motivation behind his success, Green becomes thoughtful. "Sometimes the universe has a way of disguising blessings as setback," he says. "A personal loss made me realize I had nothing left to lose. It gave me the push I needed to take risks, to fully commit to my vision." Sarah's hands trembled as she read those words. She'd thought she was leaving someone who lacked ambition, who was content with mediocrity. Instead, she'd left a man whose quiet determination and genuine desire to help others had led to extraordinary success. As months passed, Sarah worked on rebuilding her life and, more importantly, rediscovering herself. She volunteered at local environmental organizations, finding fulfillment in contributing to causes she believed in. She reconnected with old friends, those who distanced themselves during her time with Marcus, and slowly began to heal. One day, while helping at a community garden project, Sarah overheard two volunteers discussing Green Innovation Lab. The company was launching a program to install their energy systems in low-income neighborhoods, providing affordable clean energy to communities that needed it most. "Did you hear about the lottery thing?" one volunteer asked the other. Sarah's hands stilled in the soil. "Yeah, apparently he won big right around the time he started the company," the other replied. "But get this, he donated most of it to fund renewable energy research at community colleges, wanted to give others the chance to develop their ideas." Sarah sat back on her heels, dirt-covered hands pressed to her mouth. The timeline clicked into place. David's sudden success, the company's rapid growth. He must have won just after she left him. The money that could have given her everything she thought she wanted had instead been used to help others, to create real change. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she'd been chasing wealth for its own sake, David had used his unexpected fortune to build something meaningful. He'd turned what could have been a simple stroke of luck into a force for good. That evening, Sarah walked past their old apartment building again, something she still did occasionally when she needed to think. The young family was in the window, the father spinning their little girl around while the mother laughed. It was such a simple moment, but it held more joy than all the luxury she'd surrounded herself with during her time with Marcus. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother, who'd been supportive during her breakup with Marcus. "Saw David on the news today. He's doing amazing things. Are you okay?" Sarah looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights, and typed back, "I am, not because of what he achieved, but because I'm finally learning what really matters." As she walked home, Sarah passed a lottery ticket vendor. The irony made her smile sadly. She thought about parallel universes, about the Sarah who might have stayed with David, who might have been part of his journey. But that wasn't her story. Her story was different. It was about learning the hard way that true wealth couldn't be measured in designer clothes or diamond bracelets. It was about discovering that success without purpose was empty, that luxury without love was meaningless. The next morning, Sarah noticed a small article online about Green Innovation Lab's latest project. They were partnering with the nonprofit where David used to work, creating a program to mentor young inventors from disadvantaged backgrounds. In the accompanying photo, David and Emma stood with a group of eager students, their faces alight with shared purpose. Sarah felt something shift inside her as she read about the program. It wasn't regret. She'd done enough of that. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was something else, something that felt like acceptance, mixed with a growing sense of purpose. Sarah closed her laptop and pulled out her journal, a habit she'd started during her healing process. She began to write about the person she wanted to become, not defined by past mistakes or lost opportunities, but by the lessons she'd learned. Meanwhile, across the city, Green Innovation Labs continued to make headlines. David's company had become more than just a successful business. It was a movement. Every week brought news of another community transformed by their sustainable energy solution. The humble nonprofit where he'd once worked had been transformed into an innovation hub, supporting aspiring entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Sarah found herself following these developments not out of lingering attachment, but because they inspired her own transformation. She'd started taking evening classes in environmental science, discovering a genuine passion for sustainability that had nothing to do with David or her past. One rainy Tuesday, Sarah was rushing to class when she literally bumped into Marcus outside a coffee shop. He'd lost weight, and his usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled. "Sarah," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "You look different." She smiled, realizing she felt no anger or resentment anymore. "I am different. I heard you're taking classes now," he said, attempting his old charming smile. "You know, my offer still stands. The position at the company, the penthouse, it could all be yours again." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what she'd never noticed before, the emptiness behind the charm, the insecurity behind the wealth. "I'm building my own path now, Marcus, but I hope you find what you're looking for." As she walked away, she heard him call out, "He won the lottery, you know. Your precious David. He won millions right after you left. You could have had everything." Several passersby turned to stare, but Sarah just kept walking, her steps light despite the rain. She did have everything, just not the everything she'd once thought she wanted. That evening, during her environmental science class, Sarah's professor announced a guest speaker for the following week, Dr. Emma Rodriguez from Green Innovation Lab. Sarah's stomach tightened, but she didn't consider skipping the lecture. She'd earned the right to sit in that classroom, to learn and grow, regardless of her past. When the day arrived, Emma's presentation was inspiring. She spoke about the intersection of science and social responsibility, about using innovation to serve communities rather than just generate profits. During the Q&A session, Sarah found the courage to raise her hand and ask a thoughtful question about implementing sustainable solutions in low-income areas. Emma's eyes met hers, and there was a flicker of recognition. Sarah realized David must have told her about their past, but Emma's response was professional and encouraging, even adding, "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in this field." After the lecture, as students gathered around Emma to ask more questions, Sarah packed her bags quietly and headed for the door. But Emma's voice stopped her. "Miss Chen, do you have a moment?" Sarah turned, her heart pounding. Emma approached her with a kind smile that contained no judgment. "Your question earlier, it showed real insight," Emma said. "We're starting an internship program at the lab, focusing on community outreach and implementation. Would you be interested in applying?" Sarah stared at her, speechless. I don't think that would be appropriate, given..." Emma held up a hand. "The past is the past. We evaluate candidates based on their current passion and potential. Besides," her smile widened, "sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from people who've experienced both sides of the equation." As Sarah walked home that night, her mind spinning with possibilities, she passed a convenience store with lottery tickets displayed in the window. The sign advertised a massive jackpot, and people were lined up to buy tickets, all dreaming of instant wealth. Sarah watched them for a moment, thinking about how differently things might have turned out if she'd stayed with David, if she'd shared in his lottery. But then she realized she'd needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered. She'd needed to chase wealth to realize it wasn't what she was really looking for. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw the internship posting for Green Labs. Are you going to apply?" Sarah looked at the message for a long moment. 3 years ago, she'd left David because she thought he couldn't give her the life she wanted. Now, she had the opportunity to build something meaningful, not because of any connection to him, but because she'd finally figured out what truly mattered to her. The next morning, as she sat down to work on her internship application, Sarah noticed another news article about Green Innovation Lab. They were expanding their operations globally, bringing sustainable energy solutions to remote communities. The photo showed David and Emma in a rural village, surrounded by smiling residents as they installed their revolutionary storage systems. Instead of the familiar pang of regret, Sarah felt something new stirring in her heart. a sense of possibility, of purpose. She opened her laptop and began to write. Sarah's internship application flowed naturally, each word reflecting her genuine passion for environmental sustainability. She wrote about her journey of self-discovery, about learning that true fulfillment comes from contributing to something larger than oneself. She didn't mention David or their past. This wasn't about him anymore. 2 weeks later, she received an email requesting an interview. The message was from Emma, cordial and professional, scheduling her to meet with the community outreach team. Sarah spent hours preparing, researching Green Innovation Labs' projects, and developing ideas for making their technology more accessible to underserved communities. The day of the interview, Sarah walked into the gleaming Green Innovation Labs headquarters, her heart racing, but her steps steady. The building itself was a testament to sustainable architecture, with living walls, solar panels, and a design that maximized natural light. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, exactly what she would have expected from David. The interview went well, with Sarah impressing the panel with her thoughtful answers and genuine enthusiasm. She'd just finished presenting her ideas for a community education program when there was a knock on the conference room door. David walked in. He looked different up close, more confident, but still with that same kindness in his eyes. He'd grown a neatly trimmed beard, and his casual business attire suited him perfectly. Sarah's breath caught, but she maintained her composure. "I hope you don't mind if I sit in for the rest of the interview," he said, his voice professional but gentle. "Emma spoke highly of your ideas about community implementation." Sarah straightened in her chair. "Not at all, Mr. Green." The formality felt strange on her tongue, but it helped maintain the professional boundary they both needed. For the next 20 minutes, she continued presenting her proposals, addressing questions from the panel, and even engaging in a constructive dialogue with David about the challenges of introducing new technology to resistant communities. As the interview concluded, Emma walked Sarah to the elevator. "You did wonderfully," she said warmly. "We'll be in touch soon." Just as the elevator doors were closing, Sarah caught a glimpse of David in his office, deep in conversation with a group of young inventors, students from the mentorship program, she realized. He was showing them something on a tablet, his face animated with enthusiasm as he explained a concept. It was a side of him she'd never fully appreciated before. A week later, Sarah received another email. She'd gotten the internship, but with an unexpected twist. She'd be working directly with Emma on a new initiative to bring sustainable energy to urban food desserts, combining environmental technology with community agriculture. Her first day at Green Innovation Labs was surreal. The security guard issued her an ID badge, and a friendly HR representative showed her to her desk in the community outreach department. She was introduced to her team, all passionate individuals who shared her vision for making sustainable technology accessible to everyone. David maintained a professional distance, which Sarah appreciated. They saw each other occasionally in meetings or passing in hallways, exchanging polite nods. Emma, however, proved to be an incredible mentor, taking Sarah under her wing and helping her navigate both the technical and social aspects of their work. Months passed, and Sarah threw herself into her role. She developed innovative programs that combined technology education with community engagement, helped establish urban gardens powered by Green Labs energy systems, and worked closely with community leaders to ensure their solutions truly served local needs. One evening, as she was working late on a presentation for a new community project, she heard voices coming from the break room. A group of employees were celebrating something, and their excited chatter drifted down the hall. "Can you believe it's been exactly 3 years since the lottery win that started it all?" someone said. "Best thing that could have happened to this company," another voice added. "Most people would have just retired to some private island, but David used it to make his dreams reality." "Remember how he was working at that nonprofit, keeping everything secret?" a third voice chimed in. Talk about playing the long game. Sarah's fingers stilled on her keyboard as she listened. She knew she shouldn't, but she couldn't help herself. "Yeah, but you know what he always says. The lottery was just seed money. The real success came from years of research and development before that." "True. Did you hear what he did with most of the winnings? Donated it to set up scholarship funds for underprivileged students interested in green technology. Said something about believing in people who just need a chance." Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes, but these weren't tears of regret. They were tears of understanding, of seeing the full picture at last. The universe had indeed worked in mysterious ways, teaching both her and David different lessons about wealth, success, and purpose. As she gathered her things to leave, she noticed David's office light was still on. Through the glass walls, she could see him and Emma working together, their heads bent over some blueprints, occasionally looking at each other with unmistakable love and respect. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing not just a relationship, but a vision for making the world better. Sarah smiled softly and headed for the elevator. As she waited, she pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. Her salary was modest compared to what she'd had with Marcus, but every penny felt earned, meaningful. She'd started a small savings account too, setting aside money each month for her own dreams that were slowly taking shape in her mind. Sarah had been developing an idea for a sustainable fashion initiative, combining her marketing background with her newfound passion for environmental conservation. The concept involved creating a platform connecting eco-conscious designers with communities that could recycle and repurpose material. One morning, during a team meeting, Sarah found herself seated next to David for the first time since starting her internship. The conference room was packed as Emma presented updates on their latest projects. Sarah was taking notes when David leaned over slightly. "Your urban garden program is making waves," he whispered. "The mayor's office called yesterday." Sarah's heart skipped, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Thank you, Mr. Green. The communities deserve the credit." He smiled briefly before returning his attention to Emma's presentation. It was a small moment, but it marked a shift. Perhaps they could eventually be something like colleagues, their past acknowledged but not defining their present. Later that week, Sarah was surprised to find Emma waiting by her desk one morning. "Got a minute?" Emma asked, holding up 2 coffee cups. "The rooftop garden's nice this time of day." On the rooftop, surrounded by flourishing vegetation, powered by Green Labs' solar technology, Emma handed Sarah a coffee and got straight to the point. "I've read your proposal for the Sustainable Fashion Initiative," she said. "It's brilliant." Sarah blinked in surprise. She'd only shared that idea in a casual brainstorming session. "You have?" Emma nodded. "We've been looking to expand into sustainable textiles and manufacturing. Your concept could bridge that gap." She paused, studying Sarah carefully. "Would you be interested in heading up a pilot program?" Sarah's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands. Are you sure that would be appropriate? Given my history with David's the one who brought your proposal to my attention," Emma interrupted gently. "He said it reminded him of how he started, one person with a vision of making things better." She smiled. "The past is complicated, Sarah, but it doesn't dictate the future." That evening, Sarah walked through the city park, her mind churning with possibilities. A group of children played near one of the new solar-powered community centers Green Labs had helped establish. Their laughter echoed across the gathering dusk, reminding her of why she'd fallen in love with this work. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Dinner tonight? Have some news." At dinner, her mother could barely contain her excitement. "Remember that lottery ticket I bought last week? I won $500. Sarah laughed, the irony not lost on her. "That's wonderful, Mom. What are you going to do with it?" Her mother's eyes twinkled. "I'm investing it in your future. Seed money for that sustainable fashion idea you've been talking about." Sarah started to protest, but her mother held up a hand. "Sometimes the universe sends us messages in strange ways, honey. 3 years ago, you thought money was the answer to everything. Now, you know it's just a tool. It's what you do with it that matters." The next day, Sarah arrived at work to find an email from David. Her breath caught as she opened it, but the message was simple and professional. "Green light on the Sustainable Fashion Initiative. Emma will oversee, but it's your project to run. Conference room at 2 p.m. to discuss details." As she rode the elevator to the meeting, Sarah thought about how life had come full circle. 3 years ago, she'd left a man she thought wouldn't amount to anything, only to discover that true success wasn't measured in dollars, but in impact. Now here she was, about to launch her own initiative within his company, not because of their past, but because she'd earned it through her own merit and vision. The elevator doors opened and Sarah stepped out, her head held high. Through the glass walls, she could see David and Emma in the conference room, reviewing documents. Another figure was there too, Marcus. Sarah froze. Marcus looked different, humbled somehow. He was clutching a portfolio and speaking earnestly to David. As Sarah watched, David shook his head firmly, but not unkindly, and Marcus's shoulders slumped. He turned to leave, catching sight of Sarah through the glass. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Sarah saw something in Marcus she recognized, the desperate need to prove oneself through wealth and status. But now, she felt only compassion. She nodded slightly before continuing to her desk. Later, she would learn that Marcus had come to pitch an investment deal to Green Labs, trying to capitalize on their success. David had declined, staying true to the company's mission of community-focused development rather than pure profit. As Sarah prepared for her afternoon meeting, she opened her journal and wrote, "True wealth isn't about what you have, but about what you give. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters." The sustainable fashion initiative, dubbed Green Thread, launched 6 months later. Sarah stood on a small stage in one of the community centers, presenting the program to a room full of local designers, activists, and community leaders. Emma sat in the front row, nodding encouragingly, while David watched from the back, a quiet witness to this new chapter. The project had evolved beyond Sarah's initial vision. What started as a recycling platform had grown into a comprehensive program that included training for local artisans, microloans for sustainable fashion startups, and partnerships with eco-friendly textile manufacturers. They were even developing a new fabric made from recycled materials using Green Lab's energy-efficient processing technology. After the presentation, as people mingled and networked, Sarah overheard snippets of conversation about David's latest announcement. Green Labs was going public, but with a twist. A significant portion of the shares would be reserved for community ownership, ensuring that the people they served would have a real stake in the company's success. Quite different from traditional IPOs, isn't it? Emma's voice came from behind her. David believes success should be shared. Sarah turned to find both Emma and David standing there. It was the first time the three of them had been alone together since she'd started working at Green Labs. The presentation was excellent, David said, his tone professional but warm. Green Thread could revolutionize the fashion industry's approach to sustainability. Thank you, Sarah replied, meaning it for more than just the compliment. None of this would have been possible without the chance you both took on me. Emma smiled knowingly. Sometimes the best innovations come from unexpected places. She squeezed David's hand before excusing herself to speak with some investors. Left alone with David for the first time in years, Sarah felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. But before either could speak, they were interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Marcus stood there, looking disheveled despite his expensive suit. "So, this is what success looks like now?" he called out, his voice bitter. "Giving everything away to people who haven't earned it?" Security moved to intervene, but David held up a hand, approaching Marcus calmly. "What have you earned, Marcus, besides other people's resentment and your own unhappiness?" The room fell silent. Marcus deflated slightly, his facade cracking. "I could have been part of this. We could have been partners." "No," David said gently, "because you never understood what we're really building here. It's not about making money. It's about making a difference." As security finally led Marcus away, Sarah caught David's eye. In that moment, she saw not the man she'd left, nor the successful entrepreneur he'd become, but simply someone who'd stayed true to his values, regardless of circumstance. That evening, Sarah worked late in her office, finalizing plans for Green Thread's first collection. A knock at her door revealed one of the maintenance staff, an elderly woman named Rosa, who'd been struggling to pay for her granddaughter's college education. "Miss Chen?" Rosa smiled warmly. "I wanted to thank you. My granddaughter just got accepted into the Green Lab Scholarship Program for environmental science." Sarah's eyes widened. "Rosa, that's wonderful, but why thank me?" "Because you showed us that change is possible," Rosa said simply, "that it's never too late to start over, to become something better." After Rosa left, Sarah stood at her office window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Green Lab's latest project had just been approved by the city council. They would be converting an abandoned factory into a sustainable manufacturing hub for Green Thread, providing jobs and training for the local community. As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah passed David's office. He was there with Emma and a group of young engineers, all excitedly discussing some new innovation. Through the glass, she caught fragments of their conversation. Something about combining their energy storage technology with biodegradable materials. Sarah smiled to herself as she waited for the elevator. 3 years ago, she'd thought she was leaving behind a man who lacked ambition. Instead, she'd left someone whose ambitions were so much bigger than mere wealth. And in doing so, she'd finally found her own path to making a real difference in the world. The elevator doors opened, and as Sarah stepped inside, she caught her reflection in the polished metal walls. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same person who'd walked out of a modest apartment 3 years ago, chasing empty dreams of luxury. She was someone new, someone who understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in lottery winnings or designer clothes. The morning news was abuzz with headlines about Green Labs' latest breakthrough. They had developed a revolutionary fabric that could generate and store solar energy while being completely biodegradable. Green Thread would be the first to implement this technology in their upcoming collection, combining fashion with function in a way that could transform both industries. Sarah sat in her office reviewing the final prototypes when her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Chen, there's someone here to see you." To her surprise, Marcus's ex-wife Claire walked in, elegant as ever, but with a warmth in her eyes that Sarah hadn't noticed during her time with Marcus. I hope I'm not interrupting, Claire said, settling into a chair. I've been following GreenThread's development. It's remarkable. Thank you, Sarah replied cautiously. What can I help you with? Claire smiled sadly. Marcus is in rehab. The drinking got worse after Green Labs rejected his investment offer. But that's not why I'm here. She pulled out a folder. I run a women's shelter network, and we've been looking for sustainable employment opportunities for our residents. Your program seems perfect. As Claire outlined her proposal, Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. This was another chance to turn past mistakes into future opportunities. By the end of their meeting, they had drafted preliminary plans for a training program specifically designed for women rebuilding their lives. Later that day, Sarah had to present the new partnership idea to the board. As she stood before the room of executives, she caught David and Emma exchanging proud glances. Her presentation was met with unanimous approval, with one board member commenting, "This is exactly the kind of initiative that defines Green Lab." Walking back to her office, Sarah overheard two interns discussing the company's upcoming 5th anniversary celebration. "Did you hear they're announcing something big? Something about expanding the lottery scholarship program globally?" Sarah smiled to herself, remembering how differently things might have turned out if she'd known about David's lottery win when she left. But then, would she have learned the lessons she needed to learn? Would she have discovered her own capacity for creating meaningful change? Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Just saw the news about GreenThread's solar fabric. My $500 investment is looking pretty good right now." Sarah laughed, appreciating her mother's gentle reminder of how far they'd all come. That evening, as she was leaving work, she quite literally ran into David by the elevator, an echo of their first meeting years ago. Papers scattered across the floor, and they both knelt to gather them. "Sorry," they said simultaneously, then shared a genuine laugh. "I heard about the women's shelter program," David said as they stood. "It's inspired. I learned from the best," Sarah replied softly, "about seeing opportunities to help where others might not look." David's eyes held hers for a moment. "You know, I never thanked you." "Thanked me?" Sarah was confused. "For what?" "For leaving," he said simply. "It hurt, more than I thought anything could. But it forced me to focus completely on the work. When I won the lottery, instead of thinking about luxury or revenge, I only saw it as a tool to make the vision real." The elevator arrived, but neither moved to enter it. "I saw Marcus the other day," David continued, "at a coffee shop. He was with his sponsor, talking about starting over. It reminded me that everyone deserves a second chance to find their purpose." Sarah thought about everything that had led to this moment, the choices, the mistakes, the growth. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "we have to lose our way to find a better path." David nodded, then held out his hand formally. "Congratulations on the solar fabric launch, Ms. Chen. You're changing the world in your own way now." As they shook hands, Sarah felt the last weights of the past lifting. They would never be what they were before, but perhaps they had become something better. Two people dedicated to making a difference, each in their own way. Walking home through the city streets, Sarah passed a lottery ticket vendor. The sign advertised another massive jackpot, and people lined up with their dreams of instant wealth. But Sarah knew better now. True fortune wasn't about winning money. It was about winning the chance to make a difference. 1 year later, Sarah stood on a much bigger stage, addressing the United Nations Climate Action Summit. GreenThread had become a global movement with sustainable fashion hubs in 12 countries. The women's shelter program had expanded internationally, providing opportunities for thousands of women to rebuild their lives through sustainable entrepreneurship. David and Emma sat in the audience as Sarah presented the results of their combined technology. Communities transformed, pollution reduced, lives changed. The solar fabric had revolutionized both fashion and energy industries, proving that style and sustainability could coexist. After her speech at the reception, Sarah found herself sharing a quiet moment with Emma in the garden terrace. "You know," Emma said, watching David chat with world leaders across the room, "he kept your picture on his desk for months after you left. Not out of longing, but as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Sarah asked softly. "That sometimes losing what you think you want helps you find what you're meant to do." Emma smiled. "He says the lottery win came the day after you left. He almost called you, but realized that would have defeated the purpose of everything." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. "We both needed to find our own paths." Later that evening, as celebrations wound down, Sarah received an unexpected email. It was from Marcus, 1 year sober, thanking her for showing him that true success meant more than material wealth. He had started a small nonprofit helping other executives recover from addiction and rediscover their purpose. Back in her hotel room, Sarah opened her journal, the same one she'd started during her healing process years ago. She wrote, "Life's greatest lottery isn't about winning money. It's about winning wisdom. Sometimes we have to lose everything we think matters to find what truly does. I thought I was leaving David because he was broke, never realizing that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in impact. He won the lottery the day after I left, but I won something far more valuable, the chance to become someone I could be proud of. Now, years later, I understand that what looked like my biggest mistake was actually my greatest blessing. It taught me that success without purpose is empty, that luxury without love is meaningless, and that sometimes the universe's greatest gifts come disguised as losses. David and Emma are expecting their first child next month. They're naming her Hope, a perfect name for two people who've dedicated their lives to making the world better. And me? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, not as the girlfriend who left too soon, but as someone who found her own way to make a difference. The lottery ticket that changed everything? It was never about the money. It was about the lessons we all learned along the way. David learned that purpose is more valuable than profit. Marcus learned that true fulfillment can't be bought. And I learned that sometimes you have to lose your way completely to find your true north. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every step, every mistake, every lesson led us exactly where we needed to be. And that's the biggest win of all. Sarah closed her journal and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were lining up to buy lottery tickets, dreaming of instant wealth. She smiled, knowing now that life's real jackpots aren't won by chance, but by learning, growing, and finding the courage to become who you're meant to be.